Hello, so here we are in Edinburgh on this beautiful Scottish day, a rarely sunny Scottish day. You can just see Forth there in the distance, looking lovely. And I'm here for the Edinburgh Fringe. You know all about my love of the Fringe. I made a film about it, Father of the Fringe, which you can watch on here somewhere. They're screening it this week on Thursday if you happen to be in Edinburgh. The Edinburgh Fringe is the world's biggest arts festival. It sells more tickets than any other event in the world. Pretty good stat, with the exception of the Olympic Games. And I'm going to be doing a show called How Heavy, which is my own little contribution, a new show that I did the first one yesterday, but I still haven't finished writing it. It's a sort of lecture with funny bits about the eternal subject that is weights and measures. Now, why do I say eternal? Because people have been arguing about them, trying to impose them since forever. If you look at the very first legal documents from ancient Babylon, ancient Mesopotamia, they always depict rulers with the rod and the ring, which is a yardstick and a measuring string, usually being handed to the ruler by God as they try and standardise measures. Measurement's a tool of control, tool of tax, but it's also a tool of justice. When you look at the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, there's similar references. You see scales all the time, and they would be those balancing scales, and that's why most imperial measurements are done in 16, 8, 4, 2, because it's easy to halve things. So they were mathematically ingenious. They'll either be done with numbers that have a factor of 2 or 3. The very first words of the Bible establish our measures of time, the day and the week, which is something that the French revolutionaries tried to do away with in 1792 when they decimalised time. And 1 week would be 10 days, 1 day would be 10 hours, 1 hour would contain 100 decimal minutes, and each decimal minute would be 100 decimal seconds. But because the proletariat soon discovered that this meant 1 day off in every 10 instead of 1 day off in every 7, they put their foot down and the system was abandoned. It met with considerable resistance. It was also, decimalised time was an attack on the Sabbath, and that was quite deliberate because they thought if you only have your day off once every 10 days, that day off is only going to fall on the Sabbath once every 10 weeks, and so it was an attack on religion, attack on tradition as well. But yeah, they got their weights and distances over the line, temporarily at least, but time was a step too far. And what is a step, by the way, but just another new measure? It's not a metric measure, it's not a traditional measure, but we use them all the time on our phones. The 10,000 steps a day has been debunked, but nevertheless, we're all slightly obsessed with how many steps we did. I did 14,000 yesterday, which was a long day. There is to be one measure of wine throughout our kingdom, and one measure of ale, and one measure of corn, proclaims Magna Carta. One breadth of cloths, and let weights be dealt with as with measures. And even today, when Boris Johnson made announcements about being able to use imperial measures again, the culture wars kicked off. In his 2019 election manifesto, Johnson pledged an era of generosity and tolerance towards traditional measurement, to which The Guardian said, xenophobia and pseudoscience. Oh, it's got windy, and I haven't got my windjammer. I often go to the Edinburgh Festival to do these lectures with funny bits. I'm just speeding up my thing a little bit. In 2016, I did one about tax, which would eventually become my book, Daylight Robbery. In 2019, I did one about the philosophies of Adam Smith, which became, and how they manifested themselves in the economics of the Fringe, and that became File of the Fringe, the film. And I don't know what this one on weights and measures is going to end up being, but hopefully it'll end up being something. And I just think it's a fascinating subject, deeply philosophical subject, but I've also discovered it's an enormous and almost endless subject, which is one of the reasons it's taken me so long to write. In the dress rehearsal, the show's supposed to last 55 minutes and it ran an hour and a half. It's taking place in Adam Smith's old front room at Panmure House, so it's a really good historical setting. Now, the inevitable question that gets asked is, which system is better, imperial or metric? And I'm inclined to answer with the bland neutrality of the on-the-fence politician that they both have their place. I grew up with the metric system. That's what I was taught at school. But as I've got older, I've found myself certainly thinking more and more in imperial and using imperial measures. Feet make more sense to me than 30, 60 or 90 centimetres or 1.2 or 1.5 or 1.8 metres. 6 feet is a really good distance. A thumb, an inch, makes more sense to me than centimetres. A hair's breadth means more than a micrometre. I find it easier to orientate myself around pints than I do around litres, around pounds, the amount you can easily hold in your hand, than I do kilos, around yards, which is a pace. But the problem with imperial, if there is a problem, or traditional measures, I should say, they're only called imperial in 1824 when we standardised it and sent it through the empire to make sure that this French system didn't get prevalence. The problem with the imperial system is that it was never designed, it was never a designed system in the way that metric is. Most measures just emerged over time through use, and the impractical measures or the no longer relevant measures got abandoned and the useful and practical ones stuck. They're usually defined around the body, so they make natural sense to us. The buku was the distance from which the cry of a buffalo could be heard in Russia. No doubt an extremely useful measure in a country with such vast expanses of land, but it's of little use today. The pound we use today, however, roughly corresponds with the Babylonian mesa. Every culture in history has had a measure similar to the pound. Shoe sizes are defined by barleycorns. Each shoe size up is a barleycorn. A fathom is 6 foot, one's arms outstretched. A really useful measure, especially for depth. And if you're a woman looking for men on a dating app, they always ask for men over 6 foot. But yeah, a fathom. And if you see Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, you see him with his arms outstretched doing a fathom. But there are a gazillion other measures that found common use in history that have fallen by the wayside. So it's very much a perpetual market-driven system. And as soon as you analyse it with the logic of the planner, measures, they just don't seem to make any sense. And if you look at some of those flow charts on Wikipedia and elsewhere that explain imperial measures, it just kind of looks nuts. It doesn't make sense. But it's only when you use them in the real world, in the practical world, that they do make sense. And, for example, a pound of feathers weighs more than a pound of gold because they're two different pounds. An American gallon is not the same as an imperial gallon, and there's a dry gallon and a liquid gallon. And their gallon is smaller than ours, which is why their petrol seems so much cheaper than... I mean, it is cheaper, but it seems so much cheaper. And that's because they use the English system, which came over with the settlers, but we British use the imperial system, which we introduced with the Weights and Measures Act of 1824, as I mentioned before, long after the US had its independence, and we then exported it through the empire to compete with this newfangled French system. I do a detailed history of the metre. You'll discover that it's actually inaccurate. This whole thing being precise, measuring, instead of around the human body, around the size of the earth. In France, one king, one law, one weight, one measure was what the revolutionaries cried, because there was something like 250,000 different weights and measures, differing from town to town and district to district in the lead up to the French Revolution. And there was fraud, was rampant, and tax collectors took advantage of it, and their idea was to give them a system for all people through all time, said the savants. We were the 18th century liberal metropolitan elite, and instead of defining measures around the human body and the world around us, they would design a system around the earth itself, and a metre would be 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator. But they couldn't get to the North Pole and they couldn't get the equator, so they did it from Dunkirk to Barcelona instead, and extrapolated it from there. However, one of the scientists who was sent out to measure it, he got arrested for sorcery, then for spying, then for being a tax collector. He saw his money disappear with the hyperinflation of the assignats, and he had an absolute mare of a time, and he ended up fudging the data. He handed in data that met with what they thought it would be. And how much did he fudge the data by? A hair's breadth. 1 metre is out by a hair's breadth. And it might not seem by very much, it isn't. But if the total distance they got wrong was like 1,966 metres, 2 kilometres or something. But the whole point was to be precise, more precise than the ordinary yard. And they've since redefined the metre around the speed of light in the atomic clock to give it a level of precision that the ordinary yard apace will never have. But those redefinitions have always used as their base that first metre. They've always been designed to meet that first metre, which, as we've discovered, was slightly erroneous. And we do need one system of measures that everyone understands, especially for science, microscience. But in the same way that it's good to speak more than one language, so should we be familiar with more than one system of measurement. And if you want regional diversity, especially in architecture, then you should embrace diversity of measurement. Today, the only countries in the world not officially on the metric system are Myanmar, Liberia, and the United States. But on the ground, traditional measures are used everywhere, from the prevalent half kilo, which is effectively a pound, to brick sizes, which is a hand, to cargo ships, which are measured in feet, to 25 gram measures really commonly used in food. That's basically an ounce. The Chinese have actually got a measure, 50 gram measure. They've called it the liang, and it's 2 ounces effectively. The Italian etto, 100 grams, is a quarter of a pound. All these measures, even though nominally they're in metric, centimetres and kilos, they actually reflect traditional feet, yards, pounds, and so on. So we end up sort of using traditional measures by the back door, if you like. There's an incredible, practical, simple beauty around many imperial measures because they're defined around the body. There are all these little symmetries occur all the time. And so why I say long live both, hopefully in the show you get an idea of the beauty of traditional measures. And it's on, as I say, in Panmure House, 2 o'clock every afternoon. So if you're in Edinburgh, I'm only doing it for a week, so if you're in Edinburgh this week, please come along and say hello. And hopefully the motto is of my show is always interesting, occasionally amusing, and hopefully this show meets that expectation. So yeah, thanks very much. I'll put some ticket links in the bottom, and really, really interesting subject. I'll be back in another video very soon. Until then, goodbye.